Well, there's a bit of a Welsh theme in the podcast today, having just come back from speaking at an all under one banner Cymru rally in Rhyl, which I hope I've pronounced. It's an amazing experience in being immersed in a completely Welsh-speaking environment. Everybody speaking Welsh for the best part of a day and a half. So we talk somewhat about that, about the fact the Welsh are about to scrap the kind of voting system we've got for the Scottish elections, which still has the first past the post bit, to a completely proportional system. Why aren't we talking about that? They have a separate Yes movement, Yes Cymru, which was set up in 2019. Nothing to do with Plaid, standalone, a Yes movement there. Well, maybe that's Believe in Scotland for us these days, but interesting that they got off the mark. Interesting too that Labour are making so many authoritarian mistakes, deciding that they would decry the ban on the Israeli team with a terrible reputation playing here at Aston Villa, when that same team was actually banned in a match that happened just a couple of nights ago over in Israel. So why support the Maccabi's right to play? Why also Palestine Action's proscription? Looks like legal judgments are going towards overturning that ban. Why the ID cards, and why not tackle Prince Andrew and take that title away? Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Lesley Rhyl podcast. Lesley, you're returned from the far-off Celtic dragon.
Indeed, I can now say properly Rhyl. In fact, it probably isn't even proper, because every attempt I made to kind of do Welsh pronunciation for stuff, people would go, it was like being in the Gaeltacht. You just can't quite ever get it right. But anyway, wow. I mean, I was totally blown away, really, by Welshness. Welsh, the language. I just had no idea. I feel stupid. I went to Wales. I went to the journalism college in Cardiff, 400 years ago, right enough. And I mean, speaking to people, you know, a Welsh speaker, Nia, who kindly took me around Carnarvon, where we showed the Denmark film, and everyone loved that. Nia was in Cardiff about the same time I was there, and she said she, as a Welsh speaker, could spend her entire time in Welsh even then. But, you know, and that's weird, because there's your sliding doors. I remember there was one pub, the Dowlies, that actually spoke Welsh. And apart from that, it seemed like an English-speaking world. And then it led you to the presumption that Welsh was a bit of a kind of tokenistic thing, that, you know, people just spoke a wee bit and took a wee nod to, you know, the way that Gaelic gets here, or even Scots. Wow, no. I mean, like, if you look at the Caerphilly by-election that's on Thursday, where Plaid is in with a shout, Reform just ahead at the moment. But actually, as I understand it, even the Reform candidate is a Welsh speaker. Obviously, the Plaid candidate is, and I think I'm not sure about the Labour candidate. But at the rally, I mean, I went there and kind of, you know, I had a wee bit of a speech. I had a few wee prompt cards, you know, in case my brains just stopped. And I just chucked them away, basically, because from the second I arrived, there was maybe a half an hour of listening to people. Everybody spoke Welsh. You know, the guys that were setting up all the kind of hardware at the back, the engineers, the Plaid guy that was going up to speak, the Green guy, you know, all the people who had organised it speaking Welsh to one another. It wasn't just performative. It's a deep, deep, deep cultural thing. So, you know, okay, there was no Yes Spikers, there was no Sor Alba pipes, but by gum, you know, just the business of the language was completely gobsmacking. They'd not managed to walk around Rhyl before. Rhyl's on the north coast of Wales, and it kind of reminded me, and don't take offence about this, saltcoats, but saltcoats in the sense of former, you know, bit of a town and back in the day when everybody went to the seaside, working class folk going to the seaside. That was Rhyl. It's still got some sad kind of utterly empty amusement parks, as my mother would call them, a lot of cheap John shops, and just it looks battered and kind of a bit forlorn. So it was very interesting being there. And then the speech, you know, where I was actually trying to say to them, There's other countries that are a third of your size that went on to independence based on based on language. And Estonia is the principal one. Wales has got a population of 3.1 million people. Estonia, 1.1. They've both been completely overshadowed by a larger. I'm not going to suggest in any way that England is as difficult a neighbour as blimmin' Russia, but and we're run for such a long time. But Estonia always educated its children in Estonian in the same way as actually in Carnarvon, for example, it's 80% Welsh speaking. So I was just trying to kind of say, look larger than this, because if we think we've got the we too poor, too stupid argument, and we've got oil, gas, renewables, whiskey, tourism, a large land mass, blah, de blah, the guys in Wales have got that with knobs on. And I've got to say, when I was coming back, it really struck me. If you're trying to get from north to south in Wales, the train I was getting back in the end was going out to Chester. So you're going out into England to Chester to go down, skipping down through the borderlands. You're maybe a wee bit here, a wee bit there, to come back into Wales at the bottom. And I think that's a pretty big problem, actually, in a way that we don't understand, because we have this happy coincidence, geological coincidence, that there's a smallish border, and it's, England's a long way away, and all the stuff we need, we have, if you call, I'm going to get my skeletons mixed up here, an endoskeleton. All our bits are inside us. Our airports, our rail stations, our lines and everything, we can all travel around Scotland without duking in or out. Whereas the Welsh, the Welsh airports, probably Bristol is a more effective airport for South Wales, and people skip over to Manchester for North Wales. And sort of, I think that leaves a difficulty, of feeling that you've got all the important infrastructure inside your own country. But still, every country's had a difficulty. And, the incredible sort of energy and kindness of the people that I was met with was something else. And just finally, I was a complete famous first for me, because showing the Denmark film in Carnarvon, the whole meeting was conducted in Welsh. And I had an earpiece and a lovely woman called Meg who was translating the questions from Welsh into English in my ear. I answered in English, and they then talked in Welsh again. I mean, it's a different world. It's not like, maybe it's a confidence, because you could easily do that in the Gaeltacht here in the islands, probably. Well, but who knows? And you've got to say, who knows if that does actually put off some English speakers, to be fair. They're very aware of that, actually, and all the leaflets advertising this event and every other one kind of make it clear that, it's cool to speak English and so on. But my God.
And has that been on the rise then, in terms of the increase in Welsh speaking? I mean, we remember Leanne from Plaid sort of famously had to learn Welsh in order to become the leader of Plaid Cymru. So,
well, there's somebody who lives in our village who works in one of the universities, and so I don't know what nationality he is here, but he has had to learn Welsh for the job that he's got, that he does mostly by distance in Cardiff University.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there's a piece in The Guardian that's very interesting about a project to submit Welsh place names to protect linguistic heritage. And basically this is, this would be a really great one for us as well. It reminds me a bit, Brian Rhyl, the Northern Irish playwright, wrote a fantastic play, Translations, which has been done in all sorts of different languages. And it really is based on the idea in Ireland that the Ordnance Survey guys come in, and Ordnance, the names and the clues in the name, came in to map everywhere in the Celtic country instances, very often from the point of view of how to move large, battalions around.
Yeah.
But to just, the process meant that people, the English speaker asked a name, misheard it, put it down on the map wrong, then maybe decades, centuries later, that wrongly understood name in English was then translated back into Irish or Scottish Gaelic, resulting in total hips of a map that's not what it authentically should be. So the Welsh have taken steps to do that. The Welsh government has done this. People adding historical names so they can be saved for future generations. And they've had 200 submissions already with, I can't pronounce any of it, but a fairy folk meadow in Aberfan, the fields of Maelor City near Aberystwyth, collection of fields near a beach, a rock near in Gwynedd, North Wales. It's actually fascinating how unspectacular the things that are special to people actually are. So, I mean, this would be a tremendous thing to do here in Scotland, but that's a measure of how much Welsh is just on a total roll, actually. And the young people are speaking. There was a couple of bands on, really young guys. I mean, I'd said to the lassie I was standing beside, this is like the Welsh version of Kneecap. And she said, oh, we have many of them. So like there's not one young, ballsy kind of band singing in Welsh. It's all of them. And afterwards, after the rally, which was grand, everybody was, putting stuff away very efficiently. And then they were all going to play accordions in the pub. So they've got a group called Accordions for Independence, although it's in Welsh. And I'm sorry, now that I'm not in the zone, I can't pronounce it properly. But there's such a musical thing. I mean, maybe it's just that our marches are kind of bigger, given that we've got a bigger population and, hey, back in the day. So people were all going back their different ways. But I met so many people afterwards going to watch more music. Again, young folk playing in Welsh, or else they were all on the way to the pub to play and sing in Welsh with the accordions. And it's not like anybody's bristling and going, hey, don't bring your Welsh in here. I was completely blown away. Well done, you Welsh guys. And the other small things, we've got a wee, well, if you can bear all the editing, my dear, there's a wee podcast coming with some of the folk we've mentioned here. But the interesting thing is, this was all organised by Yes Cymru. And Yes Cymru, it's so ironic, was based on the Yes movement in Scotland in 2014.
And I think we can hear a wee bit from Phil Griffiths.
Oh,
now,
good.
Where he talks about their kind of how they took their inspiration from Yes Scotland.
What was it that made Yes Cymru set up as a separate organisation to Plaid? Because in Scotland, obviously, the SNP has kind of soaked up the whole independence movement after the referendum in 2014. But here in Wales, you've got a separate Yes movement.
Yes, we have. And it was inspired directly by that Scottish referendum in 2014 and the realisation here that we needed a movement, a Yes movement. So if you look at the Yes Cymru logo, you'll see that the font is exactly the same as the Scottish Yes movement in the Yes, and they've got Cymru underneath then, obviously, as a point of difference. So it was a realisation then by a group of people who got together and just set up Yes Cymru as a campaigning group, a single issue campaigning group, which would be non-party political then, with just that one goal then of working towards independence.
Yes, grand. It did strike me, I mean, I just spent the time I was down there running from trains to whatever, so I was so ready to quiz him on that, because it seems ironic that, yes, Wales has got a separate Yes movement. Nobody seems to be arguing about it. Nobody's questioning anybody's rights to be doing things. It all seems there's a lot of mutual respect. Didn't pick up any vibes of, undercurrents. So that's them. They think they've modelled themselves on us. And to be frank, our Yes movement was basically taken over by the SNP fairly cynically, actually. The logo, the full 9 yards, at about the time that these guys set up their totally independent one. And it stands them in some good stead because, for example, with the Caerphilly by-election that's coming up, there is actually a Green candidate, which would annoy. We're back in this zone again. There's about 2 to 3% they're polling the Greens. That's about the amount that Plaid is adrift of reform. But of course, the big story is Labour has just collapsed. It's gone down to something like 12% in the polls. It won with 34% before. And the possibility is, speaking to people on the ground, they don't know which way it's going to go, because there's obviously just a big pushback against Labour, and the way to sort of make a protest vote most clearly still, given all the press coverage as well, because, like the Greens that we'll come on to, Plaid gets, next to nothing in the UK mainstream media. But the hope is that those Labour guys will look at this reality in the face. It's either going to be Reform or Plaid. That is it. So, there's a lot of folk trying to persuade people to kind of shift their votes over. So it's still all to play for Thursday.
How do they vote in South Wales, we ask ourselves very carefully.
Oh, is that what your joke was? God. Right, that's grim, but there you are.
Yeah, you can't do that with Carnarvon, unfortunately. So you've got to get their Caerphillies in. That's
well, for all the Welsh folk who are listening this morning, because there will be a few, including our listener Rhyl, I hope I've said that properly, who came up in Carnarvon and said, you said at last week's podcast that wherever you go, there's always somebody that comes up and is actually listening to the podcast. And he said, it's me.
It's me. I'm the official
I'm
podcast
that man.
Listener.
And so other people were listening, and I sort of thought, God, I never tell people about this podcast. I've been doing it for so long. It's like putting your shoes on, So I kind of said to everybody, listen. So thanks to everybody, including Kate Harkis from Orkney, who I tried to record, an Orkney lass who's lived in Wales for a very long time. Very interesting views on it. Recorded in a venue that I thought was audible, but was in fact just completely blown out by another Welsh-speaking young band in the background. So thanks to everybody who kind of carted me around and showed me such affection. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, obviously, that it seems to be a more cohesive union movement in Wales, with Yes Cymru being the umbrella body. It would have been preferable, and I think it's still preferable, to have more of a Yes United movement, and there have been some attempts at that. And obviously, we talked previously about how this has been slightly undermined now by Believe in Scotland having this memorandum of understanding with the SNP, rather than the SNP being big enough and bold enough to come together with other people and set up again a new kind of authorised, official, in the middle, yes movement for Scotland that is apolitical, that can have the backing of the parties without the control, that can kind of have a membership and take a membership levy, as they do in Wales, a small membership levy. Phil was saying there, £2 a month. Similarly, the Catalans are equally fractured, if not more fractured, than the Scottish independence movement is, in terms of the kind of number of different cogs and wheels that are in there, from the kind of very far leftists to more kind of centre ground participants in the Catalan independence movement. But they still have a centralised Catalan independence campaign, which has, takes in millions of euros a year, and is able to do directed, centralised campaigning and proper spend and proper research just on Catalan independence, and also to have a more internationalist outlook, and has a kind of whole series of activities to connect with people beyond.
I mean, that's all true. And I was tried for a while to bring together people that were kind of prominent in all the different bits of the Scottish movement to try and set something up, but we didn't manage it.
No.
And I mean, I've got to the stage now where, I still feel, I do feel it would be better to have something that was not a company owned by one person. And I understand that there's a kind of steering committee which is able to influence the direction of Believe in Scotland. And I think that's going to end up having to be good enough, because, I mean, there just isn't enough welly around any other grouping to get a yes movement together, I think, now.
No, and the problem is that you can always be gazumped by the SNP and the SNP leadership coming in and saying, well, okay, that thing's doing its thing, but here's the official campaign over here.
Yeah, so it's only a question of, given that it's quite important for him, and if Believe in Scotland is going to be Yes Cymru in Scotland, really, then it's very important that there is some kind of way that the membership and that steering group can have a bit of say over things, so that, Believe in Scotland doesn't just get swallowed by the SNP. Because I think people would feel quite wary after watching what happened before, that, if you cozy up too hard, you kind of end up just becoming a place person. You end up having to swallow a lot of the criticisms you might make and so on. But I suppose on the other hand, yes, Cymru and Plaid do, at least, they do talk to each other, but they are really quite separate. So I guess the elections that are coming up will be a test, because, there's Greens, there's Alba, there's going to be a lot of other parties apart from the SNP who support independence in there. There's going to be a lot of different theories about how you should vote. And, there's a lot of people emailing in with all sorts of different ideas about how, SNP 1 or 2 or SNP 1, Green 2 or SNP, all the gamut of different possibilities. There's a minefield for Believe in Scotland. It has to stand back from all of that stuff and just not get sucked into that kind of thing. I would have to say that one thing that Phil said, and this other podcast has got the full 9 yards, but he said they didn't take a position on anything. Now, I didn't have time to kind of go through how much anything was, but clearly we've got all sorts of stances that the groupings want to take. Amongst a lot of things, just land issues, for example, which it's strange to be in. You're looking at a country that the countryside looks very like Galloway, round in Gwynedd, which is where Carnarvon is. Beautiful at this time of year with all the deciduous trees turning, and kind of not quite Monroe Hills. And then there's Snowdonia, whose name I cannot remember, but it's not called that anymore. Anyway, all of that sort of sitting up there does remind you so much of Scotland, and yet it's kind of it's a different place in so many respects. So we just have to watch how much we've got something that can do what it wants, control its own destiny, and not get completely sucked into SNP gubbins.
Exactly, and as you say, we do have a very fractured, landscape, and we're at a very fractured and different time for the forthcoming 2026 parliamentary elections. We're almost going back to the Rainbow Parliament, and that's before you get slapped over the wrist for saying SNP 1 and 2 or Alba 1 or SNP 1 Alba 2, because of course when you're talking about the Holyrood elections, you're not supposed to say numbers, because that just confuses people, and then they end up spoiling their ballot because it's a cross on both tickets. So you've got your constituency vote and your list vote.
Can I just have a little digression here, which is a dangerous thing, because I might just not remember what the hell we were on beforehand, right? But I've not my complete bête noire after travelling on trains for about 2 days really is the inane announcements that people that you have to do. The sort of, see it, say it, sorted or whatever thing, it just really annoys me anyway, was then repeated in Welsh, and you could hear the kind of cadence of it. You thought, oh God, here we go again. Then you've got mind the gap when there's no gap. Then there's take your stuff with you. Honestly, I feel like my mum's hovering over me. She used to whack me out of the lug, when I was a kind of nipper. And she'd say, now, Lesley, always look behind you, because I was a bit prone to leaving things behind me. So fair play when you're 9, maybe 11. And okay, everyone can do with a bit of a reminder, but it's the infantilized nature of these instructions. And when you go to another country where they treat people like grown-ups and they actually have a lot of control, nobody in Finland is getting instructions sort of saying, remember to take things away.
Yes, although I have to say I am famous for my leaving of things behind, normally laptop bags and what have you. So I don't really need so much as an announcement. It's just a wee guy that follows me around going, excuse me, is this yours?
But see, like, that's it. I don't think you zone out. You get this little incantation of all of the obvious things in life that you should be doing. Breathe now, breathe out. We're going to get there soon. Try nose breathing, breathe in, breathe out. I mean, I appreciate a lot of, this sounds a bit Jeremy Clarkson, get that nanny state off me. But it's more that the more that time goes on, and having been out of this country completely, it's so noticeable that, there's airports with no announcements. The second you come back into Scotland, you get that sort of, the endless announcements and the kind of tone of voice that's like, God, it's like Third World War coming, Bart. But, it's like, there's a lot to be said for just beginning to get to a situation where people expect to have more control and are treated like adults because they are. But anyway.
Sort yourself out. Yes, no, I quite agree with that one. Although there have been several days when I've been travelling where I've been kind of breezing around feeling very unencumbered and quite light and upbeat and thinking, God, this is such a great day. And I feel really sort of unencumbered. I mean, literally, this is running through my mind. And I just feel so kind of bouncy today. And I'm like, yes, that is because you have left your suitcase and your laptop bag behind. And you're just feeling lighter than you were previously because you were carrying the thing you actually need and you have to run back before somebody takes it away and blows it up. So yeah, I mean, as I was saying, to bring us back in a Billy Connolly-esque U-turn back to where we were before we first started.
Yeah, well done. I'm waiting now to see if you can remember.
Well, SNP 1 and 2, you're not allowed to use the numbers when you're talking about Holyrood elections because that gets you a slap on the back of the wrist.
But here's the thing. The Welsh are changing their voting system next year into something that looks more like they're doing away with the constituency bit.
And there's been lots of calls here, normally by unions, has to be said, about doing just that and having a multi-member ward and getting rid of the constituency bit and actually just allowing you to rank people. And of course, the Conservative Party in Scotland are particularly irked by all these people who are allowed to leave, who are actually elected on list seats, who've either gone off to the Liberal Democrats Reform or to sit as independents, who have not forfeited their seat because it was a Conservative list vote. You would think it would then go to the next person on the list, if you were actually to
But this is
office.
what I mean. Let's just get honest to God. Listen to this. We're bending ourselves out of shape completely. And here's the Welsh leaving us standing again, right? So, what they're going to do for, I think it's the next Senate election. So it's next year, right? It's a closed proportional list system for all the kind of train spotters. What will happen is there'll be 16 areas, and Wales will be divided 16 areas. Each constituency, confusingly, they're calling it that, as 16 constituencies, have 6 seats, multi-member. You know how this works, folks, because it's what you do actually nearly in the council elections. Yep. So you get 6 members in each area, and political parties can list up to 8 candidates, and you will vote for one party, or you can vote for one independent candidate, that sort of stands like a party. And then you just allocate the seats based on the share of votes each party gets. The end. Now, the thing is, if the Welsh can get going on this, what are we doing sitting around here, with all these stupid arguments about how people, they're not stupid because we're stuck with the system. I'm not meaning people are stupid to have the aim of trying to maximise an independence vote. But it's a kind of crazy thing that we're using our energy up on this instead of having a straightforward, decent system. And let's be honest, though, it's very possible that actually, that could work against the SNP, because at the moment they're going to do quite well from first past the post because so much is split up between the unionist parties. But then there's a definite beware what you wish for thing, and forgive me if I'm now horsing off in the opposite direction, but there was a brilliant article written by Peter Kellner, kind of a long-standing Westminster everything watcher, and he's just making the point that, Reform are probably about to do exactly the same as Labour did, win a landslide with 35% of the vote. And, this is what you get if you don't want to look at voting systems because you think, it's boring and kind of like, nobody's really interested in it. And, the classic one for unionists is like independence. It's got to be the top priority before you spend any time thinking about it. But, look at the damage that's going to happen. We're going to get a man who has got Thatcherite intentions in the terms of totally changing the way this country works, who will be elected with 35% of the vote, and you don't want to change the voting system.
Absolutely. and this kind of winner takes all. And as we were saying before, it's not how the majority of other countries, particularly in Europe, organise themselves, and it's not what other people are expecting. And
well, let's just get clear about this. The only people using first past the post is Belarus.
Yeah.
That's it. It's not most, it's all, but except Belarus. So we're so out of kilter with this. And Peter Kellner's thing is just looking at all the seats there. It just takes a tiny swing. If there's 27% support for reform, Farage would be left short of the seats he needs for outright victory. But 30% gives him by far the largest party. And, you know, he will be Prime Minister. But then if you look actually at what's been happening, the majorities that people are expected to have at the next election, and of course there's 4 years to go before that in Westminster, so you know some things could happen, including more stuff falling off the wagon with the councils in England, which currently are reform led, which are fairly having their problems, but still. The majorities are really declining. I thought this was fascinating. Generally speaking, the average seat in 2019 was won by a 26-point margin. The prediction for the next one, with where we are at the moment, is that the majorities across the board, the average will be 5%. So it's kind of like the public is doing proportional representation of any kind of way. They're just... There's the belief in the big boys, the belief in just Tweedledum and Tweedledee. And I mean, you've got to say, what happens after reform if they get elected and you've worked your way through everybody else and you've completely lost faith, unless you have got amnesia, where do you go after that? I merely wonder, because I hope Scotland is not going to be quite that daft. And perhaps while we're on it, I mean, we should talk about the Greens, because they've been having a pretty good couple of weeks.
Yeah, although I'll make my perennial point that it does mean that the next Westminster election may actually be quite important, and potentially would be an ideal time for a coalition of yes, a junta per si, as they would say in Catalonia.
Which will now translate.
A coalition, a grouping for yes. I mean, we would just have, instead of putting up party lists, as we had mused on in 2015, that would be a kind of bold and declarative thing to do, as expressing the popular sovereignty of the people of Scotland, as opposed to this 65-seat majority that the SNP are going for, when we're looking at the landscape of an extremely fractured politics that's going to lead to a very party-heavy Holyrood split, you know, across the board with very little between them potentially.
That's quite a confusing set of statements there, but
well, I'm saying, if I
no, but are
do
you
not
saying, so? Are you
this,
saying for the Westminster elections there should then be a yes candidate?
I am indeed, if that is where we're at that point. So if it's a kind of go it alone or go it with Farage moment, then that may be another point of crisis where the popular sovereignty of the people of Scotland may be expressed. And I think that is something that you would want to keep in your back pocket as an option, and not be publishing Scottish Government papers saying, and of course that would never be something that we would use. And I also think if you're sitting going into a 2026 Holyrood election, you have to survey the territory that you find yourself in, rather than calling for a kind of all of our yesterdays approach, saying that we had a majority in 2011, and therefore that's the only way in which a Section 30 order can be requested, and that's the only way that Scotland can have an independence referendum. I think you have to look at the territory you're in. We're almost got a kind of sort of Culloden-esque strategy of going, well, we're decided to have a fight. We don't care where we're standing in the top of a muddy marsh or not. We're just going to take a big charge down that hill and see what happens.
Yeah. And actually, I wrote a column sort of about this last week in the National, on the back of Zach Polanski, the Green leader, backing Scottish and Welsh independence, because that is a bold move. You know, because essentially by doing that, I mean, first of all, you could look weak by cozying up to people and not kind of, you know, doing the sort of John Swinney arm wrestling, I see no other parties kind of line, you know. But you could also be boosting support for them for the SNP and for Plaid in Wales by backing the independence movement. And you've got your own Green guys standing there, so it was kind of an interesting line. I don't know where he is with this now, but he also sort of was declared himself open to cooperating with the Your Party lot, although I think he's not kind of, that they went on to have a bit of a meltdown instead of a launch, although they are having a Scottish launch on Friday. Is it this week or next week? So I'm planning to go along with that, but I've got to say this Achilles heel, or whatever the heel problem is excruciating. So I'm having a bit of a mobility issue at the moment. But anyway, back to the subject. Zach Polanski, right, that's bold. To be cooperative in a dog-eat-dog world is bold. And he's bold in all sorts of not put it there, stick it, come on if you think you're hard enough kind of ways of being bold. By sort of being, very clear speaking, very able to explain things like, a wealth tax, as he did finally when the BBC got round to interviewing him. And despite any kind of publicity at all, these guys have got 100,000 members, I think, south of the border. What they got, 20 or something north of it. I think
8,000 north.
Okay. Okay. I think someone's done the maths and figured out they've actually got more members than the Conservatives, which the SNP did, actually, was the third largest party in Britain for a very long time. So, there's something kind of interesting about that contrast there where, and I didn't read all the comments because, I wouldn't get up in the morning if I did, kind of on the article. But there was a lot of people not very pleased with it who just can't see the Greens far enough. I mean, Lorna Slater will never live down the comment about, independence not being a red line for working with Labour. I think the couple that are, the co-leaders at the moment are definitely the people that I've encountered many times as speakers at independent stuff back in the day. So I think that's something that they take seriously. And yet, there's still quite a lot of just bristling when it comes to mention of the Greens, which they're just going to have to take time to, you're going to have to show that they mean it to get over that. But still, that kind of, if you like, Polanski-style boldness embraces fellow travellers. And that is what, as I understand it, the SNP committed to doing at the conference when they said they were starting a civic convention the next day, Keith Brown, I think, said. I haven't been scouring everything. If this has happened too many times, and it's always Keith that gets to have to say it, I don't know if this is happening or not. But, I'm for a bit of boldness going in that direction as opposed to, the sort of splendid isolation approach.
Definitely, although it's very mixed messages, as we said previously. And it's very interesting, I was saying what Zach Polanski was calling for. And I think he was also calling for a standalone Green Party for Wales, because it's the Green Party of England to Wales.
Which confusingly, in Wales, they say they've already got. But I mean, there was a long explanation. And this is a wee warning to any political party or indeed anyone. As soon as you kind of reach to the fourth sentence before you've got even near the end of an explanation, it's just too complicated. So anyway, they just slightly dispute that. But and you go, yep.
Well, I'm just saying that, this...
Yeah, that did stop you.
Yes. I don't even know what I was saying, to be honest. I think that'll be okay.
You were sort of saying it was a bit of a butt coming with Zach Polanski, I think. Were you not? Were you not hoovering up towards a butt?
No, I mean, I'm just, we were, I think you're quite right in saying that Keith Brown said that work on the civic movement will start tomorrow. And I think you're correct in your non-observation that so far nothing has been started or unveiled. And you do have to feel a bit sorry for Keith Brown, who is the one that normally leads these charges.
Because he's the one everybody would believe. He is like, he feels like the real deal. So poor old Keith gets rolled out to do all the kind of, difficult stuff. But God, come on. Meanwhile, another sort of side issue. I noticed that the Scottish Greens will not pass a Scottish budget without bringing buses back into public ownership. This is an interesting one because there's quite a lot of people. There's a lot of policies that got discussed and passed at the Scottish Greens annual conference, and there's a lot of people taking pot shots at it and saying this is crazy, that's crazy, whatever's crazy. But here's the thing: I can remember writing a thing about this blasted buses years ago, actually. And at that point, having spoken to what would be the kind of the body in Strathclyde that would be able to take to re-regulate buses, which would be that's got to happen. And it would let Glasgow, obviously the Lothian buses is working reasonably well in Edinburgh, but, being able to do the same thing in Edinburgh, in fact, everywhere would be good. But I think is it the Acorn? What's the name of the system that works in Manchester? I've suddenly forgotten the name of it. But that is an extremely good re-regulated system in Manchester where you've got a flat rate bus fare of either £1 or £2. And that really changes transport. No, the Greens want to have free transport, but you need to get everything being run either in public ownership or else this public ownership of the franchising and the timetabling for buses to get off their knees. So this has been waiting for the Transport Scotland Act 2019 allowed regional transport authorities to move forward with re-regulation. 2019, right? This is nearly 2026, so that's kind of a wee while. And all they've been waiting for is the regulations to be able to get advice on how they do that thing, how they fairly move forward into re-regulating. Because the big bus companies are threatening to litigate the hell out of the whole thing. And there's a wee theme developing here because there's lots of instances where there's good ideas passed and it just gets... Because it looks like there might be a bit of legal action at the back of it, it just gets put into the too hard to really see this thing through category. And there it's been waiting since 2019. There's a group called Get Glasgow Moving. They've said that. They've got pretty much every political party on board with this now. And they've been waiting for 6 years for guidance from the Scottish Government. So, come on, you've got to fix this. And that's where the Green Conference has basically said to their own MSPs, they're tying their own MSPs' hands in the occasion of a future sort of agreement or anything passing the budget.
Well, this will be coming pretty soon.
Yes.
And it's either pass this budget or have an election.
So that's how important this is. And of course, because it's about buses and Greens, it's just got... doofed into the kind of the poor wee corner. Yeah. Whereas this one could really come back to bite because the MSPs, the Greens are bound by their conference decisions, and they will have new leaders would have a very tough time if they went in, to any kind of agreement after the Butte House agreement that kind of fell apart, where they openly and consciously thwart their own conference desire to get that one thing right, and they are completely right on this.
Well, watch that space. I think. If you've not enacted or brought into force an act of Parliament passed in 2019, 6 years later, that's pretty ridiculous, and there's certainly not much.
Well, can I just jump on top of that one? Because I do get quite a lot of emails from community campaigns. There's another one that's actually on the go at the moment in Burnt Island, where Forthport decided in 2022 that they were going to put a big fence up and stop people who have been able to access the beach and so on for, yonks, basically.
Well, since the medieval period, probably.
Yeah. Anyway, so Forthport's decided they needed to put this fence up for public health and safety, right? Despite the campaign group pointing out that the emergency services have no record of ever being called to an incident at the harbour involving a member of the public. But anyway, I got kind of involved then. So that's 2022. This is 4 years, 3 years. Let's just be generous. Anyway, the point should be that the access regulations within the land reform legislation, you'd think, should basically make that not possible. But you get to call yourself a statutory undertaker, which means you're exempt from the Land Reform Act. And Forthports are insisting that they are, as the harbour authority, and that therefore they can act as they want to, and then repeat that this is health and safety that's put this fence up. So there's been all sorts of stuff going on there. There is, somewhat entertainingly, someone called Citizen Grinder, who is an unidentified person who, as the name suggests, has regularly cut the fence to enable access. So people have basically been popping backwards and forwards, continuing to exercise their rights of access. But I mean, this is ridiculous. And it's also ridiculous that what's having to happen now is that amendments are being put in to a land reform bill that's going through, which fails to bite in its main objectives, as all of them have actually done. However, it is nonetheless a pony running through the field. So somebody has run up and put a saddle on it in the form of amendments. The amendments being proposed by David Torrance, an SNP MSP. So you'd like to think then it's got a bit of a chance of success. And it basically just determines rights of access at Burnt Island Harbour. But I mean, this is
in primary legislation.
Yes. And the thing is, that should sort the access rights out. But, you know, if it doesn't, it still sort of comes down to the same problem, because the people who should have been able to enforce this whole thing are Fife Council. And we come back to, if you've got a non-compliant landowner, it's Fife Council who should have got wellied in. And then you've got the problem again of the costs of litigation. So all that has to happen is that somebody, you know, with the massive underspending there is in our built environment, local authorities, everything, if you just look like you're going to be a difficult customer and you've got a few bob like Fourth Ports or the, you know, bus companies in Glasgow, you can kind of shout around a wee bit, scare the bejesus out of the councils, the lawyers wake up and then suggest that it's a really bad idea. And just by the by, there could be a conflict of interest because Fife Council is a partner in the Fourth Green Freeport. So it's dealing with Fourth Port the whole time.
Oh, you got her.
I know, it's that bad. But this is ridiculous. To be able to get something to work, the land reform legislation that was passed in 2003, you've got to go back, get people to spend time on an amendment, and you're lucky that there happens to be yet another land reform bill going through that you can piggyback to try and get your little bit of land, Burnt Island, out of this ridiculous gubbins. And doubtless there'll be people listening to this who are thinking, Jings, we've got the same problem here. Do we need to get an act of parliament to be able to have access there? Well, I was going to say, I don't think it's that
isolated. I do remember a huge hoo-ha about Rothesay Harbour, which I think eventually got sort of sorted out more sensibly than the original proposals, although I don't quote me on that, can't quite remember. But that was some kind of EU rule that was going to have a kind of 8-foot high fence across the whole dash thing, and you couldn't fish off the pier and you couldn't get access for this, that and the next thing, and turning it into Fort Knox and making it look incredibly unattractive, or to hit some kind of EU regulation that when somebody more sensible looked at it said, no, you just need a wee fence over here to sort of, you know, put the passengers to one side and everybody else can go elsewhere. But I mean, just insane. Talking of needing...
and just to finish that one, next Tuesday is when the amendments are laid by David Torrance, and there's others involved. Mark Ruskell from the Greens is involved as well. So I'll be keeping an eye on that anyway, and I hope there'll be an article written to put some pressure on MSPs, the same way that pressure was put on the SNP regarding the outdoor education bill, which actually worked. You know, it now gets to trundle through. But I mean, it's crazy that we're all having to spend our time doing this. But we'll find out next Tuesday what gives.
Do you want to tell us about Muirburn before we go on to other unnecessary acts of Parliament?
Yes, there's quite a lot here, isn't there? Because I haven't got all of it right in front of me. By the time I'm co-chairing the Revive conference on the 8th of November with David Heyman in Perth. But Muirburn, the Revive, the coalition, has been arguing for trying to do something about the 5th of Scotland that is essentially a driven grouse moor, where there is all sorts of practice done the film that I've made recently will be shown at this conference as well. And of course, if you Muirburn, and there's all sorts of arguments online about whether it actually helps the grouse and other birds of prey, bizarrely, that seem to produce better on bits of muir burnt heather than otherwise. There's massive arguments about all of this. Small point, you don't get trees. Now, of course, if you want a grouse moor, you don't want trees anyway. But if you want to have a kind of, there's poisoning, there's all sorts of stuff goes on grouse moors to keep everything just tickety-boo for literally to prevent ticks on grouse. So Muirburn, the Scottish government was accepting that it needed to license Muirburn and was going to, everybody expected that would start last week or a couple of weeks ago. But Jim Fairley, the Agriculture Minister, announced that they're actually going to postpone it again. I think that's 2 years of postponement because they are hearing the argument from gamekeepers and landowners that small fires prevent bigger fires. And there is this argument around, actually, that if you let lots of stuff, gather, it then gets dry and it's much easier to then have a massive fire run through it. You'd have to say that much of the terrain we're talking about is very unlikely to fall into that category. And then the total irony of it was that the day that Jim announced that delay, there was a muir burn went wrong in Aberdeenshire, which resulted in a large wildfire. So, I mean...
And I dare say if it was actually covered in trees and leaf litter and a bit damper, then you potentially wouldn't be having the same massive spread of wildfire that can be in these, open moors that are, more akin to the dark side of the moon than any kind of biodiverse area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm vexed in a way because I'm sure there's arguments I could be reeling off at this point, but just hadn't quite thought about it. But will do after Revive, and perhaps we need to get these guys on to just run through some of that. But anyway, so that's another. Well, what are we doing with this? Because that looked like a win for an ecological look at what are just barren wastelands that then persuade the public that they've got land that is useless, because you look at it all the time and think, by gum, we should just be glad these sporting estates take it off our hands. It doesn't need to be like that. So it's a big, powerful argument that it looks to me like the SNP's bottled again, I'm afraid.
Ah, dear. Well, talking of unnecessary or necessary.
No, actually, can I leap in? Sorry, I've had 3 coffees this morning, so this is what I'm like. Yeah.
Gummy berry juice.
No, but because, actually, if we're going the other way...
We'll be chairing this like the Reform County Council. You'll be put on mute if you don't stop talking.
Because I just want to say that nonetheless, having been in Wales, coming back to that, there's definitely things that pop up where you think, gosh, we just are doing a bit better with this. I mean, the Welsh are having 243 billion litres of their water annually exported to England. No benefit. Severn Trent Water owns most of the reservoirs in Wales, and it sells that water, making £1 billion a year profit, none of which returns to Wales. So poor old Welsh didn't do what we, thanks to Strathclyde region, did do, which keep water in public supply. And the other problem they've got with the railways, they have not 1 kilometre, apparently, of electric rail. I mean, the Scottish government, I think, has used its own cash to electrify.
Huge amounts of electrification.
Huge. I mean, more pro rata than any other part of the UK. So there's a kind of triangle in the middle, which I think goes Edinburgh, Glasgow, Perth. That is all electrified. So, that's a good one. But the Welsh get only apparently 1% of rail investment, despite having 6% of the rail network. So there's plenty of things, that we're doing well. The energy thing, though, just exactly the same. They export twice as much energy as they use, yet people are living in fuel poverty. And from Rhyl, you're looking out at 2 massive offshore wind turbines, which benefit Rhyl not 1 iota. So now I will shut up.
Well, what I was going to say is very uninteresting, but not poor old. But Drew Windsor's had to give up all his highfalutin titles, only he actually hasn't. And the SNP and Stephen Flynn particularly are calling for an act of Parliament to strip of them properly rather than just standing aside from them as he has done at the minute. And of course, the Labour government are desperate to be not involved in any way whatsoever.
Yeah. And I mean, actually, I've been looking at a lot of this stuff. It's one thing to say is that the reason that we're concentrating on this is because Virginia Giuffre's book, was it? No,
Nobody's
I'm just
Child.
not getting Nobody's
I mean, and
Girl.
I think,
Nobody's
yeah,
Girl
yeah.
is published today, right? And I mean, as some people have pointed out, again, the world is focusing on Prince Andrew losing his titles instead of the victims like her and like all the other women who, many of whom, accredited her with giving them the courage to speak out and convict Jeffrey Epstein. So it kind of feels like it's all gone a bit, of course, as soon as you touch on anything with he was definitely one of the two people she was gunning for, pretty much, in her book and all her efforts prior to that. And you've got to say, every detail that he's finally just got wrong, from that recent email that discovers that he promised to play some more soon with Epstein after saying he'd never contacted him again. She's been proved right about so many things, and yeah, if you look online, there's so many question marks about her relatives speaking out for her, about whether she was willing or not. I'm watching, a series, Blue Lights, which is set in Belfast, and the most recent thing is entirely about grooming. And if you've not been through that kind of experience, you will have no idea how deep-rooted the guilt and shame is of being involved in something like this. And it makes you look unreliable. In fact, that whole last episode that was really compelling was entirely about understanding how flaky you look from here on in. So it seems to me it's been a terrible thing that she killed herself in April. But all of these pigeons are coming home to roost. I mean, for sure, Andrew should be stripped of being a prince. I mean, I think the folk in Wales are vexed enough that they have a Prince of Wales that has not been Welsh since, for hundreds of years. But coming back to Andrew, he definitely should be stripped. And that significant difference should happen in that, when we come back to this question of parliamentary sovereignty, it acts in lieu of the sovereign, so that essentially we are still like a sovereign country run by a monarch, except that the power is now in Parliament, in the Westminster Parliament. But if we're to kind of modernise in any way, then what is often dismissed as just a set of figureheads, the royals are not really worth bothering with because they've got no real power. Well, if they have no real power, they should be subject to a parliament that does. And a parliament that does should have the appetite to try to demonstrate that no one is above the law. And yet that's precisely where the Labour government will not tread. It won't go anywhere near something that looks like it's having an argument with the royals. So they hope, again, this will all just be swept under the carpet. And I doubt that it will, because people intensely dislike Andrew Windsor.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think, even you said women there, and a lot of people associate Virginia Giuffre with the interviews that she's given as a mature woman. But looking into this and looking at some of the online content, that very famous photograph where she's Andrew has his arm around her waist is just one of many photographs. And other ones, I think, where she's coming off a yacht, or she's at some party. She's basically 17 and looks extremely young. I mean, like a wee lassie in amongst all these 13, 40-year-olds. I mean, it's such a bizarre juxtaposition, and quite obviously dodgy, that it's incredible that, fewer people made note of it at the time. But as we say here, that the Labour government really is just kind of hoping that this is as much as needs to happen, and that nothing actually demonstrative. It's a difference between kind of resigning and being sacked.
Yeah.
They could have quite simply put through a short act of Parliament, as it has been before, when various other members of the royal family have to be booted out because they had fought with Germany during World War I, in order to strip them of their British titles. This idea of him kind of begrudgingly taking it off the letterhead and not referring to himself as Duke of York any longer, as opposed to being told, no, that's it, you're out. Your pass is not working here any longer. Your stuff's in a brown box, and Jim from security will be here to escort you from the door. It's just this kind of little tiny bit of action, it's just kind of, it's more press management than anything else.
Well, I mean, all of this lark, Prince, Baron, blah. I mean, even George Fawkes was on, for crying in a bucket, basically calling for the Prince bit to be got rid of. Now, that is somewhat ironic, because is he Baron Fawkes or what?
Baron Fawkes of Cymru, yes.
At which point was put back to him, actually, which I thought was quite kind of game, basically. And he had a tremendous kind of, yes, I long for the day when I will be basically made redundant. The House of Lords will be. So actually the interviewer kept going and saying, well, is there any sign of that then with Labour? Yeah. What are we doing here? Oh, here we are back to, well, the cost of living crisis is far more important. So we keep going with this constitutional rubbish for another decade or whatever, with this ludicrous prospect of Baron Fawkes basically calling out Prince Andrew. But for sure, if anybody wants to be a self-respecting prince, and I'm not even sure I buy that sentence from myself, you don't want that guy Andrew to have that title. So he needs to be brought into line. But I thought that Labour are just making so many mistakes like this at the moment. I mean, we've had the ID cards, which I think the SNP are bringing the game in on that one, aren't they? There's some sort of motion I think they're putting through Westminster about the ID cards. They've done it with the football match with the, to me, impronounceable team from...
This is Maccabi Tel Aviv.
Yes, who should have been, according to the government, able to play at Aston Villa and shouldn't have been banned by the police. And it's funny, whenever there's stuff that they don't want to get into, they'll definitely do, not our dance space, mate. That's one for the police, that's one for somebody else.
An independent body took that decision. We couldn't possibly get involved, whereas this was very much an independent policing body that took this decision, and really with seemingly no thought to it at all. They came straight out the gates decrying the decision.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, why? So anyway, that one seems to have kind of fallen completely kind of off the edge as well, because I think was it last night or the other night, there was a derby in Tel Aviv that was cancelled because of Maccabi fans rioting. So that this was the Israeli police cancelled a match with Maccabi and another Tel Aviv team after riots involving fireworks, stones and fights injuring officers, civilians and children, resulting in 9 arrests around their stadium. The unrest was described as a festival of violence. So this is the same fans. And if Pat was here, I mean, geez, he really had the full 9 yards, being the football correspondent in our midst, of all the disgusting chants that have come out of that team against Gaza. Are you starving kids and there's no kids left in Gaza? All of this stuff. I mean, do the Labour think we have forgotten all that stuff? And so there's another wrong one. Andrew Windsor wrong, football match wrong, ID cards wrong. And then actually, they've also, this is complicated one that we sort of just brushed on last week, Palestine Action. The Court of Appeal has kind of paved the way for reviewing the ban on Palestine Action, which will happen in November, with a judgment that happened last week. So technically, the British government failed to block a challenge against its decision to ban Palestine Action. Too many knots in that sentence for me. But basically, that's Palestine Action one step closer to probably getting the ban deemed unreasonable in the judgment that will come next month.
Yes, and there's going to be a court case in Scotland as well as in England. Craig Murray and activists are taking forward a case in Scotland at the Scottish courts, running in parallel with the case in England. And as you say, this appeal by the UK government, which is basically to try and stop the judicial review from going ahead and saying that it wasn't appropriate, has been quashed, has been thwarted, and a full judicial review will now go ahead both in Edinburgh and in England.
I should say we're interviewing Craig right after this, actually, for our other wee podcast that was looking at Salvo Liberation's case about Scotland being declared a colony. We said we would do this. It's just taken a while to catch up with Craig. But anyway, we will be doing that thing. But just on the last list of, so, you know, the stuff that Labour has got so completely wrong, they've now got apparently 29 people in jail are about to go on hunger strike who are accused of supporting Palestine action. They're saying they'll start, Prisoners for Palestine say that this will start on November the 2nd. You know, people will argue again, some of these folk were involved in vandalising 2 planes. You can then have an argument about what that exactly, you know, constituted in terms of vandalism. The authorities say it was 7 million quid's worth of damage. Other people say they have their doubts. But here's the thing. These people will be on the first, you know, pretty hugely organised hunger strike since pretty much probably, you know, Northern Ireland. And that will get a lot of publicity. Is that what you want? You know, it's extraordinary how wrong Labour have been about all these things, and how a sort of authoritarian streak and a belief that that's where the public, the available public are, or the public that might support them are, is just being completely wrong.
Completely wrong, and you know, kind of doubling down on things that are seemingly very unpopular. I've not checked this fully yet, but also discussions about how they were going to process these court cases of the kind of minor offences, you know, the unlawful T-shirt wearing pensioners, potentially getting a trial that lasts a maximum of 36 minutes with no jury. Just a kind of mass trials situation, which again is going to, I think, cause a huge amount of negative backlash for the UK Labour Party, quite rightly so, and wouldn't be tolerated for anything else. I mean, it's just totally inexcusable. This kind of mass justice is just...
The last time that happened were the Diplock courts in Northern Ireland, which was, you know, in the early 1980s. In Northern Ireland, where people were shooting each other. I mean, yeah. Jesus. Right, no more coffee for me today, I think.
Yes, who would want to be the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland at these wonderful times? So, yes. Well, I'm sure we'll get off now and speak to Craig and try and get that podcast extra out to people. We've also got a little podcast extra going out about your recent trip to Wales. I'll put the dates up again for the Revive conference, which is 2 weeks' time on the 8th of October. And there's also an event in Aylesford, or Athelstanford, which is the birthplace of Scotland's Saltire. That's the 60th anniversary of the Saltire Memorial being unveiled there on Sunday the 30th of November. That's St Andrew's Day. And we'll be look out for plugs about that in the coming weeks. And on that note, we'll see you next week, champs.